Recently, there was a report on the so-called Alternative Influence Network, or AIN, which gained a lot of media attention. There were stories in major news outlets like The Guardian, Wired, Variety, etc. The report was so popular, I believe, because it's about something that's true, there are right-wing YouTubers, and that true fact intimidates mainstream left-leaning news and political outlets. Also, there was a nice graph. I was pleased to find and read the report because I was hoping to find some tips on how to grow my own YouTube channel's influence, and boy did I find some. For example, I can make you all trust me more by being more relatable. Which reminds me, do you guys know what it's like when the bright sunlight causes a glare on your screen? That's the worst, huh? Having read the report, there are some significant problems with it, which I'll review in 3 sections. Number 1, the quality of reasoning in the report is poor. Number 2, the report is methodologically unsound. Number 3, the report actually means nothing. My review of the report will have more detail, but I think it's best summed up with this apt quote from famed Nazi dog trainer Count Dankula. I find it hilarious that people of differing opinions simply speaking to each other is such a foreign concept to these people that they think it is some mass conspiracy that they need to collect data on. End quote. Part 1. Poor reasoning. Language represents ideas, and how you tie ideas together makes arguments. In some sense, language is how and what you think. If you're writing a professional or academic paper, the quality of that language reflects the quality of your thought. I realize what I'm about to do may seem like nitpicking, but please hold with me because I think it does provide some insight into the report. I promise I won't review the entire report like this, just the first paragraph. The paragraph starts out fine. Sentences 1 and 2 are, "The Alternative Influence Network is a coherent, discursive system, despite the seeming variety and independence of its members. In this section, I show how these figures are connected by an interlocking series of videos, references, and guest appearances." Sentence 3 is where trouble begins. Quote, "Within the AIN, a hodgepodge of internet celebrities claiming a variety of political positions impart their ideologies to viewers and each other." End quote. There's an unnecessary comma after the phrase "within the AIN." The word hodgepodge is incorrectly hyphenated. Wikipedia clarifies that while hodgepodge, all one word, is an English word, the hyphenated form refers to either a comic or a soup. The phrase "internet celebrities claiming a variety of political positions impart their ideologies to viewers and each other" is a bafflingly complicated way to say they discuss politics. And again, I want to stress that I'm not picking on the writing of some random internet comment. This is a published report, referred to by mainstream media, presumably written by a professional. Quote, "The boundaries between different political groups of influencers and the ideological positions they promote are often slippery." End quote. This sentence is unnecessary because obviously groups of people talking politics will have overlapping positions, and drawing clear delineations between people will always be difficult, and that's not especially true of the Alternative Influence Network. This sentence serves only to distract the reader from the main thesis, and the use of figurative language, the word slippery, is off the desired tone for an academic research data-oriented paper. Quote, "Many identify themselves primarily as libertarians or conservatives." End quote. This is a terrible sentence because it is so vague. Many? How many? Most? More than 2? Are they libertarians or conservatives, and how many of each? From a group called the Data Society, I'd expect more specificity than many. If this claim were made on Wikipedia, it would instantly be marked with a "how many" annotation. Quote, "Others self-advertise as white nationalists." End quote. This is confusing for 2 reasons. Self-advertise suggests that there is some non-self-advertising happening. Are the libertarian and conservative YouTubers being advertised by something or someone else? It's also just a strange way to describe claiming a political affiliation. Imagine asking someone about their politics. You would know what they meant if they said, "I'm a Democrat," whereas if they said, "I self-advertise as a Democrat," you'd be somewhat confused. The second reason this is a bad sentence is because, in conjunction with the previous sentence, this seems to describe the universe of politics in the Alternative Influence Network as libertarian, conservative, and white nationalist, which, as we'll see later in the report, is not correct. Quote, "Simultaneously, these influencers often connect with one another across ideological lines." End quote. Simultaneously with what? Simultaneously with self-advertising? Clearly, the word simultaneously should be dropped from this sentence. Quote, "At times, Influencers collaborate to the point that their ideological differences become impossible to take at face value." End quote. We see the author has a problem with meaningless appositive introductions like simultaneously or at times. The phrase at times doesn't mean anything and should be dropped. Quote, "For example, self-identified conservatives may disavow far-right extremism while also hosting explicit white nationalists on their channels." End quote. Again, "for example" is unnecessary. The writing would be much cleaner and more direct with phrases like this deleted. Quote, "Within the AIN, this collaboration generates a cross-promotion of ideas that forms a broader intertextual common ground." End quote. Again, "within the AIN" is unnecessary. The author refers to this collaboration, so recalling that the collaboration is within the AIN is redundant. There's also an unnecessary comma separating the words broader and intertextual. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time talking about the bad writing, and that's only the first paragraph. Nearly every sentence within it has a problem. So why is the bad writing relevant? When something is well written, you know that effort has been invested into it. The author cares a lot about what they are writing. There have been multiple drafts, an editor has looked at it, and the words on the page mean exactly what the author wants them to. Conversely, when something is not well written, you don't have that confidence. A poorly written YouTube comment, for example, might contain a brilliant insight, but it's much more likely to be just an idle thought. The writing style of the AIN report, which combines needlessly obtuse language with basic writing errors, reminds me very much of a college student. A bit of research reveals that the author, Rebecca Lewis, is indeed a college student getting her PhD in communications. Poor and careless reasoning is regularly found throughout the paper, like the poor and careless writing. Here's a more concrete example. When writing about the YouTuber who goes by the name Blonde in the Belly of the Beast, the author says, quote, "In her case, she began getting red-pilled because she felt the black students at her high school self-segregated and had different demeanors than the white students. These included, as she describes, more dropouts, teen pregnancies, and physical fighting, 3 tropes that are common among white supremacist depictions of black people." End quote. The National Center for Education Statistics documents that black students are more likely to drop out. The Health and Human Services Department shows that black teens are more likely to be pregnant, and the U.S. Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention reports that black teens are more likely to be arrested for aggravated assault. All of these facts can be discovered with minutes of Google searching. Blonde in the Belly of the Beast notices something about her high school, which happens to mirror statistical realities reported by the U.S. government, and the author connects her to white supremacism under the faulty logic that white supremacists also believe these apparently true facts. Therefore, she must be connected to white supremacism. White supremacists may believe that the sun is the center of the solar system, but that doesn't mean that Copernicus is a white supremacist. As a disclaimer, I'm not familiar with this YouTuber, and she may be a white supremacist. My point is not about this specific YouTuber, but instead about the poor reasoning of the AIN report. In the conclusion of the report, the author refutes herself in consecutive sentences, writing, quote, "YouTube is built to incentivize the behavior of these political influencers. YouTube monetizes influence for everyone, regardless of how harmful their belief systems are." End quote. In other words, the author first suggests that YouTube is built specifically to incentivize the behavior of the alternative influence network, but then immediately states that YouTube actually monetizes everyone using the platform, which refutes the idea that YouTube is built specifically to incentivize the AIN. The AIN report author writes, quote, "Martin Sellner and Brittany Pettibone, a pro-white anti-immigration celebrity couple, use Instagram and YouTube to showcase their relationship as the embodiment of trad relationships and gender performances. While Pettibone and Sellner may appear like many other good-looking young people posting flattering images on Instagram, on YouTube they openly advocate a total end to immigration." End quote. This is an example of poor reasoning because the author is connecting 2 young people in a relationship talking about their relationship on social media to something sinister just because the 2 also have specific political views. Her point is, they talk about their relationship on Instagram, but they're against immigration. Isn't this sinister and evil? It just doesn't make sense. It's illogical. The author cites a non-specific point in a 30-minute YouTube video with Martin and Brittany talking to support the idea that they openly advocate a total end to immigration. I watched the video indicated at a sped-up rate, but I didn't hear any such statement. Instead, Martin Sellner seems to specifically articulate that he wants less immigration, such that there would be a net negative effect on population, rather than a total ban on immigration.
In Austria, every year about 70 to 80,000 foreigners leave the country. In Germany, it's about 900,000 at the moment. It's a huge number, but at the same time, much more coming in. So the saldo is always positive, so we always get more and more migration. But if you would reduce the non-European trends and working migration, since our capacities for integration and assimilation are completely over, then you could create a minus migration, a negative migration that year by year could slow down the growth of parallel societies and in the end also shrink them down.
The idea that the author gets basic facts wrong connects us to our second point, which is that the method of the paper is unsound. At the heart of this report is this meaningless graph, and I'll talk more about why it's meaningless in a little bit. The graph purports to show the network of the alternative influence network. The nodes on this graph are specific YouTubers, while the vertices of the graph indicate that the joined nodes collaborate together. To get the information to make this graph, the author writes, quote, "I manually collected data from each influencer's video titles and, at times, video content to determine each of the guests they hosted in their content between January 1, 2017 and April 1, 2018, end quote. However, this method seems poor. I took a different approach and picked a node that is, according to the author, not central by either measure of centrality, Heinrich Palmgren. I took the name of Palmgren's YouTube channel and Google searched for that, plus the name of a few other nodes picked at random, and found that there were collaborations between Palmgren and Jared Taylor, Brittany Pettibone, James Alsop, and Wife with a Purpose, all within the AIN author's specified date range, and none of these connections are indicated on the graph in the report. In other words, Palmgren is represented as an edge figure, but it's much more likely that he's more central and more connected than the author makes out. Independent journalist Tim Pool also noted that many of the edges connecting to his node are in error.
There is a line from me to Coach Red Pill. I have no idea who Coach Red Pill is. There is a line from me to some black guy. I have never collaborated with or even I don't believe I've interacted with some black guy. It says in the top left, each line indicates that two connected influencers appeared in the same YouTube video during the period of January 1st and April 1st, serving as guests, hosts, or collaborators. She is not saying that someone simply mentioned me. She is specifically saying I was a guest, a host, or a collaborator. So first of all, yes, Carl Benjamin. Now there's a line from me to Andy Worski. I have never even, I may have met Andy Worski at VidCon, but I don't believe we've ever actually interacted or anything of that nature. Maybe I said hi. I never made a video about him. I'm pretty sure. I've never appeared on his channel. Some black guy, never happened. They have a line from me to Destiny. I only somewhat know who Destiny is. I've never interacted with him. They have a line from me to Kalen Robertson. Now, at the time of this study, I have never interacted with Kalen Robertson, but he did briefly appear in a video in May, a month after the study, when I was on the ground in London and asked him what was going on. But to imply, this line here, as it pertains to the study, is factually incorrect. They also have a line from me to James Alsop. I am pretty sure the only thing I can think of in terms of James Alsop would be when I was in Berkeley, maybe he walked past my live stream, but that would have been a minute out of a 2 to 4 hour broadcast. I have never made content or collaborated or guested with James Alsop, nor has he on my channel. And they also have a link from me to Blonde in the Belly of the Beast, who I don't even know who that is. So here we have this study claiming, you can look at how absurd this whole thing is. Look, I've never interacted with half these people. They have a line from me to Destiny, I don't know who he is. There is no line from me to Blair White, but Andy Worski, I've never interacted with him. Yet they draw these connections, and this is factually incorrect data. So I want to say right off the bat.
In other words, there are vertices that do exist on the graph and should not, and vertices that do not exist on the graph but should. This isn't the biggest problem, though. The biggest problem is the nodes. Why are these nodes represented and not others? Consider Sam Harris. He has collaborated with Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin, and Ben Shapiro. So why isn't Harris on this graph? Put simply, if you're allowed to pick the nodes you want, omit the nodes you want, add vertices that don't exist, and omit vertices that do exist, you can make a graph that shows anything you like. The data underlying this graph is complete nonsense, and even a cursory spot check would reveal that. This brings us to point number 3. The graph is meaningless, and so is the report as a whole. Let's imagine that this graph were created by a careful researcher, and the data it represented was actually correct. There is some reasons why some nodes are included and some are excluded, and all the vertices are accurate. So what would this really show you? It would show you that there is some network on YouTube of people with different political ideas who collaborate together on videos to talk about politics. Okay, so what? This isn't a crime syndicate. They aren't recruiting people for a terrorist organization, so who cares if they talk to each other? The AIN author writes in the conclusion that, quote, "This report has shown how a particular network of political influencers perpetuates far-right ideology on YouTube," end quote. But actually, the report has shown nothing of the kind. Many of the YouTubers discussed in the report do have right-leaning ideologies, and they do talk about politics. But the report hasn't even made a cursory effort to show that the extreme opinions are being perpetuated by this network. Do well-connected nodes have more followers, better engagement, or faster growth than less well-connected nodes? If you don't know the answer to that, if you haven't even asked those questions, then how can you claim that the network is perpetuating a far-right ideology? Isn't it equally plausible that the network draws the audience toward the more moderate positions rather than the extreme edges? You see the extreme positions on the far edge of the graph, and then you're drawn into the more moderate positions, as they would seem more reasonable in contrast. The report doesn't even seek to answer questions like that, or even ask those questions. This report is filled with bad reasoning, bad writing, the arguments don't make sense, the research underlying the report is demonstrably incorrect, and even if none of that were true, it doesn't mean anything anyway. I don't really hold this against the author of the report. I wrote some bad papers when I was still in college too. I do hold this against the news organizations who are basing articles off of this report and writing about it as if it were some great revelation. Did any of the reporters writing stories about this bother to read the report? If so, why couldn't they tell it was nonsense? At the very least, getting the basic data behind the main graph in the report completely wrong should be disqualifying. And any reporter who bothered to do 5 minutes worth of spot checking could tell that the graph is absolutely riddled with errors. This is a bad report, and the fact that it's being taken so seriously by the mainstream media should say something about the quality of that media. If you enjoyed this video, then please let me know by clicking the like button. If you want to see more content in a similar style, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for your time.